Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Mingione. And how are you?
Doing okay on this rather gloomy, rainy Sunday.
Yeah, we'll just call it Sunday. And Michael Jello. Mike, how are you?
Oh, it's typical Buffalo weather. I have to do our ad read, but while we start the show, get in the game with Upper Deck E-Pack, where you can buy, open, and collect hockey cards of your favorite NHL players anytime, anywhere. They're not just digital cards, but real cards you can get mailed directly to you. Trade with fans from around the world. Sign up to open a free pack of cards every day only at upperdeckepack.com. That's upperdeckepack.com. And I heard X-Dog barking at the sound of my voice before. So there you go.
There we go. And we do have Eck from Hockey Buzz and Kevin Allen on to talk about the trade deadline, what's happened and what might happen. So how are you guys doing?
Great.
Fantastic. I didn't want to sleep in today. I didn't want to sleep in today or anything.
No, I mean, you don't need sleep back. You'll be.
My wife said, so who's on the show? I said, Mike, Russ, Kevin, and Anthony. She's like, so this is just like a normal show, except you won't screw up the date. You won't screw up the date. And they're actually getting your butt out of bed. I'm like, yeah, that's it. You got it. That's it.
Yeah. So miracles do happen. All right. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the smartest team in the NHL. I'm going to call the Tampa Bay Lightning the smartest team in the NHL because for all the teams that we were talking about David Savard going to, that was probably the last one on the list simply because of the price, but they managed to work that out because Steve Yzerman took on money and he paid for a draft pick, a 4th round pick. So Kev, we'll start with you with what you felt like Detroit was doing there and was it good for them?
Well, yeah, it's terrific for them because it's not a money issue for them. One of Yzerman's part of his strategy is to stockpile draft picks, and not just because this is going to be a difficult year to kind of project because they don't have as many viewings as they normally do of prospects, but that's just been a strategy from the very beginning.
Right.
And I think he just feels, it's mathematics. The more chances he has, the more likely he is to get some picks. So it was a real smart do. And, the other thing it's lost a little bit is that, Brisebois, it was his protege, and they're helping him out. I'm sure the Lightning could have gone elsewhere, but he went to his buddy, Steve Yzerman. And Yzerman, who still has, I'm sure, some affinity for the Lightning. He helped build that franchise. He helped them there. But, the other thing I'd say about that trade is I was convinced, and boy, was I wrong, that nobody was going to do better with a single trade than the Islanders did. I mean, the Islanders addressed all of their needs and sort of prepared themselves for the playoffs and really did a nice job of getting it done. And then along came the Lightning, one of the last teams I expected, because Brisebois said publicly, there's nothing we can do. We don't have any cap space. And boy, he sure figured out what to do and, added a, very solid, dependable playoff style defenseman that's gives them a better chance of repeating.
Can I add something to that, Russ?
Yep.
He added a guy that has destroyed them in 2 playoff series. Like Savard has really been very, very good against Tampa in the last 2 playoff series. Like that, and that's also fascinating.
Yeah, and and you did mention Savard later. Yesterday you mentioned him. I don't know if we ever mentioned him on the Buzzcast as far as going to Tampa, but
yesterday I tweeted, said, watch them get Foligno and Savard. Watch Tampa get Foligno and Savard. We were talking about that.
Well, no, I had
no idea.
I have to give credit to Elliot Friedman because last week on his webcast, he said on his podcast, he said that there was a lot of chatter about Savard in Tampa, but he didn't know how on earth they were going to be able to fit his salary in. And well, we now know what they did. They had 50% and 25% retained by Columbus and Detroit to make it work, and it worked. Now they've got a top 4 defenseman, and he's a very solid playoff performer.
He's a macro version of, and Brisebois spoke about this. He's a macro version of what they had with Zach Bogosian in many ways, in that you have that additional, not just toughness as well, but just that, a steady, strong defenseman who who can help you through help you through these playoff battles as they're attempting to repeat. Again, to me, it's the deal that lines up a potential rematch in the East Final between Tampa and the Islanders. I think it was a phenomenal trade for Tampa. Perfect rental situation again, exactly the element that I think they needed on their blue line, and they got it.
Yeah, they wouldn't have wanted a guy with any contract on him. They wouldn't have gone after Savard if he had another year because they got enough problems without any another contract. But one final thing maybe to add on this is, this wasn't just a one-off for Brisebois. He thought outside the box before. Everybody was thinking, he either had to get rid of Johnson or Palat or, Killorn because of his salary cap problems, and he didn't. He figured out a way. He bought some people to buy some long-term injury relief and did it a different way. And it's exactly what he did here when even he said he couldn't do anything, but he figured out a way to do it by doing just what Mike laid out and, getting two people to take, first half of the salary and then half of the half to make it work.
And Kevin, I think what you just said is going to be the narrative for the next 24 plus hours before the deadline. I think teams don't want players with term unless it's somebody who's got a ridiculously economical contract.
Right.
But for two reasons. One, the cap is staying stagnant at 81.5 for the next 2 to 3 years at least, and expansion. Teams are not going to want to add, they want rentals because rentals are disposable. They're gone at the end of the year. You don't have to retain them. You don't have to worry about the cap space, but you have to worry about players who've got term on their contracts. And that's why I think you're going to see very few deals where you have players that have term left on their contracts.
One last thing I'll add is a key point from the chat where Michael Cohen's talking about basically taxes in Tampa, and nobody knows tax evasion better than Michael Cohen. So if you want to read that, that's pertinent to this. So at any rate, we move on. The one thing I think also Yzerman, if he gets a bucket full of picks, he could start moving up in this draft too. And that, especially like in the second round. So that could be a benefit too. I'll tell you my favorite trade, and it's not because I mentioned it as a possibility. It's just because I really feel like this solidifies the Avalanche. And that was getting Devin Dubnyk from the Sharks. And that was for what? Greg Patterin and a fifth rounder. I mean, that's a great trade. It's a great trade.
Wouldn't they, let me just throw this out there for the panel to discuss. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't they have been better off getting Bernier?
I don't think so. I actually
Bernier played great.
He has, and I did talk about Bernier as an option for them. I felt like Dubnyk was a better option simply because, for lack of a better term, he covers more net. And at the end of the day, he's different than Grubauer. Bernier is a little bit more like Grubauer. So I feel like this is like a change-up pitcher coming in. Like if you've got a starter that, all of a sudden is getting tanked in the first 2 innings and you could bring a completely different starter in the game. I think this is maybe the thinking behind what Colorado did. Yeah.
And he's Bernier for Toronto too, which is good.
Not a chance.
I think it would be a fantastic move.
I'll just say this with regards. The specter of last year's playoff run is, I think, hanging certainly heavily over this deal to make sure that Colorado, if they had another catastrophic injury along the level of what happened to Grubauer going into the bubble, their bases are now covered. And I think there's also a familiarity with Dubnyk as well from his years in Minnesota. Colorado played him plenty, so they know a little more, I think, maybe with regards to him, and he's more of a known quantity.
But I think it was a bit more up and down. Like he's a little bit more. He can be. Bernier's a little more consistent, I think, where he's more like he could really be very, very good, but he can also go kind of cold too.
Mm-hmm. He's been pretty good this year, though. I've seen him in 2 or 3 games for the Sharks, and I saw the older Dubnyk rather than like the last year's version.
Right.
I think in backup, you want somebody more consistent. I think if someone's coming off the bench, we want to know what you're getting. Maybe not necessarily the great or the greater or the worse.
But you have to remember that his downturn in Minnesota had to do in part with an off the ice situation. Yes. And I think he's bounced back this year. The thing about this trade that I think we should watch over before 3 p.m. is that this sets the market in terms of a price for a goaltender. A 5th round pick and a guy who was dumped on them from Minnesota and Patterson is not a big price. So Ryan Miller, or maybe a guy like Rittich, you're not going to be spending much more than a 3rd or a 4th round pick. The only goaltender out there who's a rental who you might have to spend a little more is Allmark, and that's because, like you said, Buffalo's trying to sign him, but they might not be able to get that done. And if they can't get that done, then they're probably going to trade him.
Yeah. I think Colorado looked at the Carolina goalies too, but Waddell wanted more than Joe Sakic paid for Dubnyk.
Yeah.
Which is
no question about that.
Just hilarious because Dubnyk is more established in a playoff scenario than either Reimer or Mrazek. And
he would have been an upgrade, I think, on either. It had Dubnyk going to Carolina in this circumstance. Yeah. I think we all would have extolled that deal from Carolina's perspective if they acquired him. So
we would have. So another deal, the Buffalo Sabres deal, where they finally trade Brandon Montour. We've heard about him going to be traded forever. To Florida for a 3rd round pick. What I found interesting in this deal is I think Buffalo should have retained some salary to get a 2nd rounder out of this rather than not retain anything and get a 3rd. But go ahead, Mike, you got your finger up. Go.
Well, I think the reason that, and again, I'm not 100% sure whether it's 2 retentions or 3 retentions, but they have to, it's 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you're right, Russ. If it's 3 retentions, then if it was only 2, then they have to retain on Hall to get the maximum value for Hall. With Montour, $3.85 million, you retain 1.9 to make it more affordable. Maybe you get a 2nd round pick, but
yeah, that's what I would have done.
You come up against the fact that the Pagulas don't like to buy out people, and they sure as hell don't like to retain salary. They did on Eric Stahl. They're going to have to do it on Taylor Hall. Maybe they didn't want to do it on all 3 players.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts, Eck?
I thought it was a interesting pickup for Florida, but not really the best pickup they could have made. Like I felt like this was a guy that they got. Montour is very much a single offensive minded defenseman. And they need more help defensively. I would have tried to go a little bit more towards the like Josh Manson area, like that kind of thing, and seeing if I could have gotten somebody like that. I mean, I know Winnipeg is hard on Josh Manson, so I think that could push that up. But and the Montour, there weren't a whole lot of teams. I mean, Montour, he was out there and he's like, he's one of the best defensemen available, but it's really like the best defenseman available in a really weak market, as far as tradable guys go. So it wasn't like he was going to necessarily light it up. I mean, we'll see. They probably see something in him that I don't, but I don't think
Florida. I think Florida here is, and Russ and I had this discussion when the trade happened yesterday when we were covering the Flyers game, that Florida's plan looks like they're looking to distribute Ekblad's ice time and responsibilities, and they have maybe certain ideas on how that can be accomplished more by committee. And I also don't think Florida is necessarily finished. I still think, obviously they've been talked about being, involved in with Nikita Gusev talks there, but even then, I mean, they could be potentially involved in other things too, where that's where they decided to distribute how they're deciding to use some of the assets that they have for certain acquisitions.
And after Savard, Montour was probably the best righty defenseman left in the rental market. So that's why he plugs it. He's not going to plug in for all the minutes that Ekblad plays, but he can probably play 17, 18 minutes. To your point, whoever mentioned Winnipeg. Winnipeg apparently does not want to trade for a rental. If they're going to trade, they want somebody. If they're going to give up a top prospect like a Dylan Sandberg or a Hanola or a 1st round pick, they want somebody who can answer their problems on the blue line for more than just
That's been a Cheveldayoff thing forever.
Well, I think that's just because they have players that leave so frequently that if they can get one on the hook, it helps that process.
But sometimes you have to not do that,
I know.
I mean, I don't know. Cheveldayoff is a tough one to read sometimes, but this is like one of those situations that he definitely does. He definitely wants to do that because of that situation. You're exactly right. But I think that now there are things out there that people are saying that Manson doesn't have Winnipeg on the trade list. I've seen that that he won't accept the trade.
Okay.
That's always possible, and definitely possible, but at the same time, not always overcomable. Like sometimes that can be fixed. Kevin, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm with you.
I thought you were okay, cool. Okay, no problem.
All right, so the next one, and this one I found interesting. Colorado gets defenseman Patrick Nemeth from the Red Wings, who now have a bucket of 4th-round picks. And like I said, maybe they'll try and trade up or something. But the Patrick Nemeth acquisition, based on Twitter, he is the greatest 8-point defenseman that has ever existed in the NHL. He's got all the right analytics. He's got everything going his way. I'm not even sure Joe Sakic got him for that reason other than just depth. But, Anthony, maybe you're smarter than me.
No, I mean that's been established fact for a while, Russ. But now in regards to Nemeth, I like the element that he does bring to Colorado's blue line, especially when we're getting into postseason. I think fairly solid. He's just like a solid defenseman for me. I mean, if you're looking to have, I do think it's depth, but I think it's valuable depth. I think it's definitely worth the 4th-round pick. And again, if you do get into injury, you want to have guys who are fairly safe. I think he's pretty safe in his own end, and that's the thing that I look at there. That he's just, it's your typical. Honestly, to me, it's like a typical trade deadline type of move where you're just making sure to kind of cover your bases here, and I like that.
Yeah.
I for the most part think it's good. But it is a little. It is. Is there a bit of overhype on it with regards to it? Of course, there is.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask Kevin about that since Kevin covers him and knows him in the area. Kev, what's your feeling on this one?
Well, Yzerman likes highly competitive guys, like not normally competitive guys. He likes the guys who are just a little bit up, and that's what Nemeth has been since they brought him into Detroit. Mm-hmm. The Red Wings are not a good team, as everyone knows, but he was noticeable at all times just because of his compete level. He's big. He showed a little bit that he was a smart offensive player this season. Like he's not a gifted offensive player, but he knows when to step up. And he's had some moments when he scored. The goals he scored have been important goals, and he just sort of knows kind of when he should take a little bit of a risk. But I think Anthony was right on when he said this is the kind of player that normally moves because he's a very safe player. You plug him in, he can play 17 minutes, and he's gonna help you because in those 17 minutes, that there's going to be a steady play back there. So I really like the acquisition, and there was a thought among the fan base that the Red Wings should actually try to sign him just because he is kind of a stabilizing effect, and next year they're going to have younger defensemen, and he might be nice.
Moritz Seider will be there. They'll have guys coming.
Yeah, and you still have Stahl in the mix there at least.
Yeah, but
depending what happens.
I think they're going to try to move him. The problem with him obviously is his salary.
Right.
He's a big $5 million guy, but he's another guy. Like he's not really mobile, but he has really shown here in Detroit how competitive he is. He plays hard. He's the only Red Wing who's played every game, I think.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he's they've liked him here a lot. The guys that Yzerman has brought in, not surprising because he's very picky about who he brings in. They've liked them all. Like they've liked the guys that have come in and the way they compete and everything else. The same thing with Bobby Ryan was, the Red Wings absolutely adored what Ryan brought to the team. But at this stage of the career, they're bringing in guys who are just dependable, not outstanding.
But this is a comfort level deal for Joe Sakic because Nemeth was in Colorado for 2 years before and actually played pretty well for them. Yeah. So And the injuries that they've had on the blue line, Makar has been hurt, Taves has been hurt, Eric Johnson's been out for most of the year. I mean, to get a steady bottom pairing defenseman who can eat minutes, that's invaluable. So that was a really good move for Sakic.
I have something that's breaking. I just got texted, guys. If you want me to jump in for just a second.
Yeah, jump in.
There's two things. One, Matthias Janmark, we know about, right? He's been out there a lot in the rumor mill. He was scratched and stuff like that. I heard Boston with a big interest there. You could see that. And the other one is he scored 2 goals last night. Mike Hoffman scored 2 goals last night for the Blues. I don't know if you saw that or not. So he's had a terrible season, but he has 11 goals. Like, everyone says how terrible. It's always a chase with Mike Hoffman. Like, everyone always says how terrible he is.
It's a Mike Hoffman season. He'll score, but
you
don't know what else you're going to get from the other end.
I'll repeat what one general manager told me, which I thought was a remarkably precise assessment of Hoffman. Is he's got more goals than anybody you have among your wingers, but when you look at him and compare him to those wingers, you'd rather have the guys you have. That is
perfect. That is perfect. I agree.
That is the perfect assessment. He scores. He's very good at that, but he doesn't bring you all the other intangibles that you need sometimes with your wingers.
And you would think with him, Kevin, that especially with a team that had made their reputation defensively as St. Louis has, and had plenty of talent in their lineup, championship level talent, that you could find a role, and he could find a role and be like effective and kind of come into that culture. It's still, it seems to be the same story.
Well, the team that's looking at him is very interesting. Okay, I remember I said Janmark was Boston, but Hoffman is Toronto, and that's a fascinating one on so many levels. Like, just personality wise, Hoffman is definitely a different kind of personality. Doesn't always get along with everybody. Don't know how he'd handle the pressure of Toronto.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what is this dysfunction junction? Where's your function? I mean,
but he's purely going to score goals, and the issue is he when they say they're looking for another more help scoring, that he's the best guy you can get for that.
I just feel like this is like a Senate hearing, and anytime we bring up the Maple Leafs, Mike says, "I object." Like, it's just
no, because
I agree.
Well, no, because the names that are brought up sort of fly in the face of everything that that team supposedly is looking for. I mean, I don't think so. They're looking for a top 9 winger, but they're looking for somebody apparently with beef like Nick Foligno or Miles Wood.
Okay.
I mean,
tell us how Riley Nash fits in there, because Yarmo, traded him for. If he plays 25% of the games, he gets a 6th out of them. So he essentially dumped him for salary. Right. So tell me what his role will be.
His role will be when somebody gets injured in the playoffs, he'll be the guy who comes in on the 4th line. That's basically, he's going on LTIR. He doesn't cost them a thing. I'm sure Yarmo was happy to even get a conditional 7th out of it, because he was out probably for the rest of the year, and Columbus is not going to make the playoffs. So to get anything for him was a bonus. And for the Leafs, they've played against Riley Nash twice in the last 3 years in the playoffs, when he was with Boston and when he was with Columbus, and he's been sort of a thorn in their side as a depth forward who can take face-offs, who can kill penalties. If he's back 100% healthy by the playoffs, that you're going to need more than 12 forwards going into the postseason. So I think he's a good add there. Plus, and Elliot Friedman explained this pretty well last night on the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast. When they made that deal and then they put Frederick Anderson on long-term injury, the Leafs have over $6.5 million in cap space now at the deadline. That tells me they're definitely going to go and get a forward, and maybe get the depth defenseman, and maybe also get a goaltender, because I don't think they would have put Anderson on LTIR if they didn't plan on keeping him on there for the rest of the regular season.
Okay, and let me ask you about, let's see, like the LA Kings. Seemingly they've fallen out of it, or enough that I think they'll be sellers. Do you hear anything about the Kings? I can't imagine they're going to buy.
From what I've heard there, Blake's a tough one to read. I think as far as the GMs go, like he tends to do unconditional things. Like he's not your standard, like, we're buyers or sellers. I think they're in both mode. I think that's sort of what I get from, I talk to my King source, that they would buy or they would sell, depending on what's offered or what's out there. They are, they have the big issue right now is the guy they're trying to sign.
Alex Iafallo.
Right. That's a big issue for them right now. And they've got to get that done. That's a major thing for them. I have not really seen any Kings, with the exception of, like I said, a couple times Dustin Brown's name being mentioned, but that would be something that would just be absolutely have to, all in Brown's control if he wants to do that or not. If he wants to go to a team.
And I imagine same with Jeff Carter, right? Like he probably doesn't want to go anywhere.
Carter doesn't want to go anywhere at all. That I know. He doesn't want to leave. But I think Dustin Brown, like I think when I heard his name mentioned as a possible replacement on the island, if they didn't get Palmieri done, that made some sense to me because that's like Dustin Brown is Anders Lee. I mean, they are very similar. And then he's going to a team that could win a Stanley Cup, and that's exciting. Dustin Brown pretty well, Kevin. Do you think there's any chance he would go anywhere?
I do know him. I think, I guess it would depend on the team and the circumstances.
Yeah.
But he's so well established out there, and I brought this up on your show, Eck, but we always forget the human element that
for sure.
When you got family, they live out there. He'd have to go out by himself probably. And then they've got to decide what's it. I don't even know where his contract is at.
He's got one more year after this year, so it would be
one more year. I don't see. I think he's harder to move with that 1 year. Mm-hmm. I don't see it happening.
And he is a guy who's already won Stanley Cup, so that's like not the big selling point,
right.
That's another thing
that's big. That's why Getzlaf, not all that interested in leaving. So.
But I do just another thing about Hoffman and Toronto, by the way. That seems like there's something to that. I'm looking. I don't know. We'll see.
What about Athanasiou? I can't imagine LA is going to hold on to him. Is he going to be like a last minute, middle of the day, last second trade?
Yeah, he'll be like for the GM that doesn't want to go into the press conference saying we didn't pick up anyone, right?
It's going to be coming. It's the annual event, right?
We'll be sitting there waiting, and it'll be 3:15. We'll be like, okay, we're going to say, oh, wait a second, hold on, another trade just came in. That was after the trade deadline. It was like stuck in the fax machine.
Yeah, you're being
Athanasiou is now suddenly a Ranger. I don't know.
The romance with Athanasiou is always greater than the reality.
Oh yes,
yes.
But saying all that, there is still some appeal to him because of his speed.
The speed factor. Yep.
Yeah, and really is really remarkable, the acceleration. But one thing that's never really brought up that I would say just from observation is he doesn't have the hands that you really want with that speed. Like he's been on a breakaway. I've seen him on numerous breakaways, and his cash in level isn't high enough.
Combined, we need to hybridize. We need to somehow create a cloning machine to put Mike Hoffman and Andreas Athanasiou together and get a hell of a forward.
Yeah. I mean, it is remarkable, but there was a running joke in Detroit for many years, and people would say, "Chris Draper on a breakaway. We'll be right back after this." And because Chris Draper was a very effective player because he was a gritty, hard-nosed. But he got razzed because of his hands and because he was so fast. And when you're that fast, you're expected to be able to cash in on those breakaways. And
I call that Michael Grabner disease.
Grabner cashed in 1 year on the Rangers, but not and really no other time. So that's
what he kind of reminds me. Kind of reminds me of the thing about Athanasiou is that those who don't watch Detroit all the time or don't watch LA all the time, when you see Athanasiou, you're seeing him do something spectacular. Like you're seeing a highlight reel film, and you're like, "What the hell? That guy has like speed, like Pavel Bure type speed, and he's just tearing down the wing, and he's doing something spectacular." So that's why his name is always intriguing to people because I think people do when they do see him, you're like, "Wow." Yeah. I mean, I think that Florida could possibly go for this. Like this is, but I haven't heard that. That's just I know what they're looking for.
They have Anthony Duclair, and they're going to add Athanasiou.
And Duclair is the same thing, right? Like Duclair is the same. He's like also you see him on the highlight film, and you're like, wow, he did something spectacular too. both of them like look like they could be the next greatest thing, but then if they're on your team, there's 15 games you're not sure if they played, or not. And
yeah. So different subject. It looks like, and I don't think this was unforeseen, that the St. Louis Blues have righted the ship. They've won 3 in a row, and Jordan Binnington is now thrown down the gauntlet again and really fired up his team. And I'll go to Eck on this one first. But honestly, Eck, I actually think he's the leader of the team right now, because it seems like as he goes, they go, and he now seems to have that mojo back where he doesn't care what you think, he doesn't care what I think, he doesn't care what anybody thinks. He just is out there to win games.
Well, that's his personality in general too. Like that's the other thing that's really good about that. Like he really is he reminds me a little bit personality wise of Brian Boucher. They both have that a bit aloof type thing, but really
I used the phrase with Bush from my own experience. There's a cocky when they're on. There's a
There's a real cockiness about it,
cocky assuredness about them.
But they also seem like the nicest guy in the world, and but they also have a real mean streak in them.
Mm-hmm.
And they also both of them also went through a lot to kind of get to the NHL. And I think that Binnington was going to be the next best thing forever, right, with St. Louis. But
just to be clear, Husso won yesterday's game, but Binnington laid down the gauntlet the game before.
So. Oh, yeah. No, I think that a guy who's been through the wars like that, a guy who was definitely I thought their MVP in the Stanley Cup run, no questions asked, in my opinion. I mean, a lot of people had great, but if it's not for him, they're not even there. And yeah, I think that he has the respect to that room. He does, and and it is weird for a goalie to be that guy though. Because that's usually not in goalies' personalities to be that guy.
Jonathan Quick.
Yeah, and the fact
Quick
to a degree, I would say
Lundqvist on occasion,
yeah.
Luongo, I would say, but there's some guys that aren't necessarily, some goalies don't want anything to do with that.
Ron Hextall.
Actually, Pekka Rinne is that way too. Actually,
yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't view Quick like that. Quick,
no,
yeah,
Quick didn't like dealing with the media.
That's
in terms of maybe not from the media perspective as much, but just in terms of a guy that I think the team coalesced around.
Well, Quick was like Hasek in that he could change the way his team could play. The Sabres could take so many chances when Hasek was great, and that just made them far more aggressive because they knew that Hasek would save their bacon. And the Kings were like that. The Kings could take all measures of chances when Quick was
perfect. Quick thing. I just had this a really funny quick story. And I had to say this. It's I love this story because when we were at the I was in Washington D.C. Kevin, you were there for the Sochi thing before the U.S. team went to Sochi, and they were having their practices. Burke was there and everybody was there, and they would bring guys into the locker room at certain times to talk to us. So Quick's time was 2:42 or something like that. It was when Quick and 2 other guys were going to come in. They were coming in 3 at a time,
Right.
So he came down at 1:42, and someone's and whoever the USA media guy was say, oh, you're not till 2:42, and Quick said okay, and sat down on the floor for an hour. He just sat there.
Did he burn in?
He sat down, and I remember sitting down. And it's and everything. You're not, and it's just every other player came down early. They go back to wherever the players were hanging out. He just sat down.
Yeah, what I remember about Quickie is, and maybe you'll remember this too, Ak, for the Stanley Cup playoff press conference where you have all the players are gathered. It's like the NHL version of the Super Bowl media day. Except not nearly the gaggle of reporters that you have for the Super Bowl. But Quick showed up one year and he was wearing a hoodie, and he just looked like a punk. He was buried so deep within his hoodie that you could barely see his head. You could just see these eyes peering out, and he just wasn't in the mood to be there. And I remember people in the media just talking about why even bother to do it if you're going to come out and be like that? But I want to make a couple points.
I don't know who said it, but somebody told me one time that Quick was Mike Richter's id. Ooh. Pretty damn good, isn't it?
That makes some sense because of their personalities were so different. But
I'm gonna finish up
a couple of points about the Blues before we.
Oh yeah, I want to finish up with the Blues. So go ahead, do that.
Yeah. Just because Russ had brought up about that maybe it was Binnington, But could it have been Armstrong that turned this around by going around the league? And Doug Armstrong is he's one of the most underrated general managers in the league, in my opinion. I've always felt it. And he's so shrewd. Like, he is such a bright guy. And he knew that if he went around and started offering his free agents up in the trade market and started talking with it, that it was going to end up in Friedman column and everybody else.
That's a great point.
Yeah. And then suddenly that team, since that happened, when we started seeing, it was about the same time when you started hearing a lot of talk about maybe the Blues are going to be a seller. All of a sudden they started to play better. And the other thing is, and I throw this out for discussion, but we always talk about hockey being such an important sport with regard to team chemistry, and that, we're not like the NBA where one player can, dominate to the point that he can just sort of carry you in. But saying all that, like, the Blues seem completely different because of not having Pietrangelo this year. Yeah. Like, I've watched them a lot, and I'm just struck by they just don't seem the same confident team. Now, there's other issues there as well, the Tarasenko issue and other things. But I don't know. I am, as good as Pietrangelo is, I'm still surprised that his loss has shown to be as significant as it has been.
Now, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mike, the two things I was going to add about the Blues, and then I'll let you go, was I like the patience they have with Jake Wallman, because now Wallman's starting to get minutes. He's never going to replace Vince Dunn scoring-wise, but he does everything else Vince Dunn can do. And I think by him playing now, and they see he's a fiery guy, that could be the guy who replaces Vince Dunn eventually in the lineup. So I think that was smart. And Jordan Kyrie's doing really well. And for people that were sort of wondering when it was going to happen, it's starting to happen for him. So I'm happy to see that. Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think Kevin's right in terms of Armstrong floating the names out there of Bozak and a few others that were their rentals. But you have to remember, this is also the general manager that when they were in the playoff race a couple years ago, in a playoff spot, they did trade Paul Stastny. And a year before that, or a couple years before that, they traded Kevin Shattenkirk when they were still in the playoff race. It doesn't mean that they won't trade Hoffman, but if they're in the race and they have trouble scoring, they probably are going to keep Hoffman because he's one of the few guys who's been consistent in terms of scoring for them over the last few weeks. So I don't know whether they will go down that road. They
keep benching him. That's I would agree with you, but they keep putting him. And he scores when he's in there, but they keep putting him on the press box. I think that chemistry-wise, he's not working with them, and I think that that's an issue for them. I think that they're not going to blame this whole thing on Hoffman, but it's easy to blame this whole thing on Hoffman. It's like inside your head, this was such a great chemistry team. Yeah, it's way more to do with Pietrangelo leaving. You're right, Kevin. But in this situation, it's like, okay, what's wrong with our locker room? I think they're going to move him.
So let's talk for a minute. Oh, go ahead, Kev.
Well, I was just going to say, do we put too much emphasis on that? Like, should we be in hockey concentrating more on what guys can do? And then, I think there's still room in sports for a one-dimensional player if you surround him by, a bunch of other guys. Like, aren't the Blues strong enough as a team?
That was my question. Exactly. Yeah. It should have been strong enough as a team, but I think it's probably, again, you're right, not pointing it just at Hoffman per se. It's just there was a bit of change there. I mean, when your longtime captain it does leave, and there is a group dynamic, I think, more than anything that may have been shook. I mean, you look at they bring in a guy like Krug, different type of defenseman, but fiery competitor. But again, there is a delicate mix. I think it's true in many sports, but I think that's true in hockey as well.
Let me put a finer point on this too.
Go ahead.
In hockey, not only do we tolerate and accept the one dimension grinder who only adds kind of the character / hard nosed playing style, we celebrate them.
Yeah.
But when your one talent is just scoring, we look down upon him. Why doesn't he do anything else? But, the guy who's on the fourth line, and nothing grinds me more during a playoff when a guy says, when I score, it's bonus.
Right.
I was out there to check. Yeah. Well, when you do what you can to take the pressure off, but that's really not your job.
Right.
You know why, Kevin? I think because the one-dimensional player who's sort of a grinder, I don't think that fans perceive that player really hurts you. Usually they're responsible defensively, or they provide some physicality. Whereas the one-dimensional offensive player usually is the guy who gets caught out there. There's a 2-on-1 going the other way.
Yeah. But you just said it yourself. It's the perception, because that guy that can only check does hurting you, because when he's out there, you're not getting the goal.
I will say this, and I think it may be also kind of a macro vision of how fans, view the sport. Hockey being in terms of, for other sports like football, baseball, it's kind of it's a little bit there further down the road. So it's like an underdog sort of mentality that I think a lot of hockey fans sort of gravitate towards, because they're always trying to get people to say, hey, we got a great sport too. But there's a bit of, I think there's a little bit of, almost like a group psychology thing involved there.
Well, it's a huge underdog. I don't get one last thing. Sorry, Russ. This is about that. And I do think Kevin, that you're right, that we in the media tend to do that. But I think teams also, there is definitely a thing about locker rooms in the NHL that has always amazed me. There are guys. There was one guy, and I won't say his name, years ago, was traded constantly around because he was like a born again Christian and would like go into the locker room, and people were like, he makes me uncomfortable. And I would always be like, why is he getting moved again? Like, well, he's kind of like, just makes people sort of uncomfortable. He holds these prayer things or whatever, and it's just like, and then then you have other guys who we've seen moved because they're just like, Hoffman obviously had issues in Ottawa that we heard about, all that stuff that went on. And then, and then there've been just guys that there's something about, like, if you don't fit into the locker room that you can get, it doesn't really matter sometimes if you're scoring at if you're scoring at major rates, it matters. But if you're scoring at, if he had 20 goals right now, no one would care. But, it's like, but there is a point at which NHL players get Hamilton. Hamilton's another example, right? Hamilton, we look at Hamilton in Carolina, right? He was like a freak or whatever, likes to go to plays and stuff like that, likes to go to museums on the road. Yeah, and that was shot against him. I mean, but it doesn't matter now because he's a freaking incredible player.
Yeah, now he's a Norris candidate. I want to
no one cares about that, right?
Two records that were set last night, and we'll see if one of us could let me actually read them before they react. But I'm going to give myself credit for Austin Matthews becoming the first U.S. player to get 30 or more goals in each of his first 5 seasons. I can't tell you how many times in his draft year that I was asked the question, is he really this good? And they'd say, well, how good is he? And I'd say he's just below McDavid. And I would, and then, of course, all it took was one season in Toronto, and then the hype was just all out there, and it didn't matter. But he's backing it up. And also Jack Campbell becomes the first goalie in NHL history to win each of his first 11 games to start a season. And so perception, we're going to ask Mike now about perception. Perception is, this is Jack Campbell's team now, Mike.
Well, first of all, I guess tanking was a pretty good idea, right?
It was.
We're not going to get into that debate. I'm not going to go there. We don't have time for that.
You may think it's a good idea. I'm not advocating it, though.
No, I mean,
it's a good idea if you can actually develop talent or don't have coaches. It's a good idea.
You got the right timing if you're lucky.
Yes, if you have to win the lottery when somebody like that or McDavid is drafted, but you have to like the lottery. You have to be in it to win it, and they were in it.
And now the Jack Campbell talk.
Yes,
maybe we won't be seeing Freddie Anderson rush back yet.
Well, I think the signal that they sent by putting him on LTIR, I don't think that was. I mean, clearly there's something wrong here. I don't think it's Jack Campbell's hot, so let's keep Freddie out. I think there's something.
No, I don't think it's all of that, but I don't think that's helping the process. I don't think that's rushing Freddie back. In other words, there's a chemistry thing here too, and if he keeps winning.
Russ, I think they want Frederik Andersen back at 100%. And if they don't think they can get him back at 100%, because clearly at less than 100%, he was a sub 900 save percentage goaltender. And that doesn't help you. Now, right now, Campbell is red hot.
But here's the argument. Jack Campbell is less than 100% and he's undefeated.
Right.
That's the argument.
Right, different people operate in different ways. He's able to play through it, and Anderson is not. I mean, he's like, he's like a finely tuned Ferrari apparently. And if something is wrong, he's going to end up in the junkyard. So I mean, honestly, right now, I think that's what it is. I think right now what they're going to do is they're going to put Anderson on LTIR like they have. They're probably going to go out and get a goaltender, and then Anderson may be the backup when they come back for the playoffs when the cap hit doesn't matter. But right now they're riding the wave. I mean, you can't. He's 11-0. He's got a 9% save percentage of 9.
It's a blue wave, Mike.
Yeah, you're not going to mess with that. Just like the Ottawa didn't mess with the Hamburglar a few years ago. But if you remember, he started the first game in the playoffs. They lost, and then they put in Craig Anderson. So very, very, very possibly, Russ, if Jack Campbell loses game 1 against Montreal, game 2 starter is Freddie Anderson.
Okay, I can see
short
that.
leash. The short leash is an NHL tradition.
Yes.
Oh yes, time honored.
I mean, Matthews is an amazing player. Let's just. I mean, I've written articles that and I still kind of feel this way. I'd rather have Matthews than McDavid on my team. That's just how I felt. That's how I felt. I mean, McDavid's incredible, but Canada will kill you for even suggesting such a thing.
Different flavors of ice cream.
They are, but I would rather.
Yeah, but it's hard not to. I mean, Connor McDavid really is generational, and
Right.
I love Matthews, and what he's done is he's lived up to his billing that. When he was like 16 or 17, they were talking that he was going to be this player, and he's lived up to that. He's done everything that he's supposed to do. But Connor McDavid is just spectacular. I think it was Scotty Bowman who said he's the only guy who seems to go faster the two people he's seen in his lifetime who skate with the puck faster than they do without it is Connor McDavid and Bobby Orr.
I can see that.
Well put. I think to me, Matthews is really reminding me most of like Eric Lindros in odd ways. Like as I see, he really reminds me of Lindros in a lot of ways. Just the way he shoots, the way he sees the puck. And I said this before, but to me, Matthews is better than anybody else in the NHL at receiving a pass. Like that is his magic. He just receives.
I would.
And he's got a premier passer in Marner as his line mate.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have that Lindros bull in a china shop type.
No, but I think that works. I think for long-term career longevity as well.
Yeah,
and it's a different game now.
Is there.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed when I watch the Leafs how his players that are out there with him will throw the puck towards him. They don't even care, and they play quickly because of it. They get to play quickly because they can just throw it towards him. Like they're not trying to put it on his stick. They're not trying to put it on his tape. Just throw the pass towards him.
Well, you know what? I think he's one of the few players in the league where he knows how to settle down a puck. Like that used to happen.
Incredible.
That used to be a time-honored tradition, like Kevin would say. Back in the old days, everybody knew how because the ice was always crappy. But nowadays, there's very few guys that do know how to settle down the puck in any situation, and he's one of them.
And that's
the other difference between Eric and Matthews is the minute that Eric Lindros came in the league, he wore the black hat.
Yes,
he was
right.
True.
And Matthews is not a villain. People don't go to the arena to root against him and to hate him.
No. True.
He's a respectable player.
No, that's fair.
Agreed.
So, Eck, what else are you hearing? There's a lot of other teams. There's a lot of other players. I'm going to give you a team now because they won yesterday, and everybody's expecting them to win today. What do you think Chuck Fletcher will do with the Flyers?
How long do we have? Before we have to head to the game, Russ. Okay.
I'm not going today.
Okay.
Spoiler alert.
All right. So, what will Chuck Fletcher do with the Flyers? I think yesterday they assured that they won't be sellers. And I know that sounds crazy, but in that they are right. They're so right on the edge.
Crazy. I don't think it's smart, but I don't think it's crazy.
I'm not saying it's smart, but they are close enough. And today they could beat Buffalo, and Boston could lose to Washington, and it gets even more interesting, right? So it's suddenly at that point, and Boston has a lot of games in hand. Has 2 games in hand for sure, but games in hand aren't necessarily the greatest.
Do something with those games in hand, as we always say.
It means they got to play more games in fewer times. So it also. I saw Boston last night. The difference between Boston in this game versus the 2 games that the Flyers played Boston is Boston was tired yesterday. You can see it.
Well, all right. So
you also, I would say again, the loss of Grzelcyk during that game
was massive.
Wore them out. And
what are they going to do?
Hold on, Steve Kampfer can't run a power play, and he can't hit the net. and he derailed their power play single-handedly. And they didn't have Rask, they didn't have McAvoy, they didn't have Carlo, and they didn't have Grizzly.
I would also give Philadelphia credit for having. Granted,
they
not
get
having
some
Grizzly
credit.
out there was bad, but I thought for the first time in a while that penalty kill played the way it should have.
I agree with that
They
too.
were so passive, man. Ed Snyder would have rolled over in his grave, and I was watching the game.
But at least but again, the sticks were in lanes.
The sticks were there.
All right, but real quick on that, because I don't want to spend too much time. But Vince Dunn is a guy I look out for with the Flyers. And I heard that today, that here's a defenseman for St. Louis. That again, St. Louis does move players sometimes. Dunn would make sense with the Flyers. I know that they have interest in Manson too. If they win today and Boston loses today, the trade deadline will be really interesting for them.
Well, what happens if it's the opposite?
If it's the opposite, then they probably aren't sellers or buyers. I don't think they're going to get in much for Raffle, and he's their main guy that they would be selling, I think.
What about
I don't because again, as we stated on the Buzzcast, I do not believe they're trading Scott Lawton.
Although with Lawton, there is a thing going around there that they're not going to sign him yet. They're going to wait till keep him as a UFA. Then not have to protect him, but talk to him and say, "We'll sign you after the Seattle."
It's very dangerous. I think it's a dangerous thing to do.
It is a dangerous thing, but he really wants to be in Philadelphia, so that's the only reason you could maybe pull that off.
Then sign him on July 29th or July 29th or whenever free agency. I don't understand. I don't understand these teams. You can get something for a player.
It's a difference between us and Toronto. We care about winning here, and it's like no. I'm simply saying that there's a difference here in Philly. Being sellers for them is really hard. It's not in the culture.
You have to be really for them. I would agree with that on this is that you have to be. They had to be really out of it,
It's like Montreal being sellers, it's like, or Boston being sellers. Like those are teams you don't hear as sellers, they just don't. I mean, the Flyers, last time they were sellers, they traded Peter Forsberg to the Nashville Predators. I mean, they really aren't sellers. They don't look at it like that.
And again, as I stated, they have to in my view with Philly has always been organizationally is that they have to really be out of it. It has to be one of those years where they are completely buried right now they're not. So they're in a vertical climb to try to get in. Yeah. But it's not impossible. But it's not.
They're not a good team. I mean, they're not.
Again, if they get into the postseason again, the likelihood of them getting beyond one round is minuscule. But
I thought the funniest quote, Kat. Kat, I don't know if you guys know Kat on this. She's in Winnipeg. She's in the Flyers Twitter sphere. She's hilarious. Oh my gosh. So my favorite thing I've seen about the Flyers was. The Flyers having a lead are why I have trust issues with men. She tweeted out the other day.
That speaks to a larger concern.
Yeah, that's a topic.
No, but I thought that was phenomenal. No, I thought that was absolutely true because I feel the same way about the Flyers with the lead. I'm like, I was waiting for Boston to tie yesterday. No question asked.
I think we all were. I think covering that game, we were all waiting for it, and that's been the Flyers pattern.
Yeah, my internet's getting a little shaky, so. I'm going to just leave it out with this one last thing, and then you can go, Mike. But the one last thing is going to be for Eck. Where's Taylor Hall going? And is he even in Philly? Do we even think he's traveling with the team anymore?
Not in Philly. I talked to Don. I talked to Don Granato this morning, who's one of my favorite people. And I really, if it was another time, I was like, well, we got to get together for like a lunch. But you can't talk to anybody now. I'm like, whatever. Mm-hmm. You can't get together with people, obviously. He had the best quote. I said, is it challenging to do what you're doing right now? And he said to me, it is challenging, but it's actually similar to a normal day in the AHL, actually. He's like, you're going to lose your best player or your hottest player, but you have a lot of good guys around trying to work really hard. I thought that was perfect. I thought that's like, it is. This isn't for Granato, who's sitting there, Montour's gone. Well, he was one of my better players. He's gone, because it's like an AHL team. I thought that was perfect. Is Hall going to get traded? Absolutely, he's going to get traded. But the fact it hasn't happened yet is really surprising me. Maybe TSN paid them off to have like the trade deadline show. But why?
Or we finish recording this show and within 30 minutes we get an announcement.
Yeah, I think he's going to get traded today. I do. I just can't see it. I can't see them running to the very end on this. Kevin? But unless they just have nothing, Kevin. Maybe they have absolutely nothing that they like.
Well, I mean, I do think he'll be traded because I think it would look so bad if they don't
Yeah.
get something for them. But they're trying to make sure they get something out of it. So they're going to try to take salary and try to make it at least something they can sell to the fan base, because the fan base is so unhappy right now and that's a big issue in Buffalo. Like that's never an issue in Toronto or New York or Boston, but it is an issue in Buffalo. You can't afford to have your fans your fan.
Oh yeah, you can't.
It's just hilarious, though, that we're talking about a team accumulating draft picks and they have very little scouting staff going into the upcoming draft. It's going to be sort of all on Kevin Adams in the future.
Optionality, Michael.
Yeah.
The Flyers, talking to the Flyers yesterday, they hate this draft coming up with a passion. I've never heard a team to go down on a draft.
I could understand why.
It's
from a team perspective, it's very difficult to cover.
It's perspective
to cover
wise.
the guys.
It is. It's difficult. It's perspective wise. As Kevin stated the other day, sometimes you may want to get as many picks as possible to maximize your chance of getting someone in such a strange year. But it
I think we should all make a guess as to where Hall should go to end the show. That'd be kind of fun, I don't know.
But I will say, Philly probably also feels this way because they've got prospects and systems, so that it does kind of shade your view, especially if you have a dearth of prospects, then you do want to hit.
Right.
All right. So to end the show, since my internet's a little more stable at the second, I'll do it, and then we'll go around the horn. I will go with Taylor Hall ending up in Florida. Eck, where do you say?
The rich get richer again, Colorado.
Okay, Mike?
New York Islanders.
Okay. Ant?
Edmonton Oilers.
Oh, I like that.
Kevin?
Well, you know what? I'll make sure we have 5 different ones. I'll go Boston.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
There you go.
No.
Edmonton's my 1A for sure.
And of course, there's the field. And there's the field on this one because we could all be wrong, too.
We could all be wrong. Yeah.
They don't trade them and forget it. We might as well just take
Watch
the spot and put it in the trash can.
Staying in Buffalo.
Here's how hockey works. We've had this discussion. We've talked like this. I love how hockey works. Here's how hockey works. You know where he goes?
Tampa.
The St. Louis Blues. We've talked about it all day. That's where he goes. He goes to the Blues because,
They ship Hoffman and then
ship Hoffman out. Somewhere
Hoffman
else.
goes to Edmonton and St. Louis picks up Hall.
Right, there you go.
Wait, are you
Hoffman,
suggesting
Hoffman,
another three-way? Wait, hold on, Eck. To finish out the show, are you suggesting the possibility of a three-way deal?
Once the cat's out of the bag, right, Eck? Once the cat's out of the bag.
Probably 3-way will be an offer sheet that will be made next year to I'm just kidding.
Christ. I think there will be at least one 3-way deal tomorrow, and the team that will be the middleman will be the Chicago Blackhawks because they have so much cap space.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's it.
Yep. Sorry. Okay.
No, that's it. We appreciate everybody coming on. Thanks, Kev. Thanks, Eck. You guys are always on, so I'm not going to thank you guys. And that's it for Off the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.